Just how exactly was Marvel Studios going to deal with the major cliffhanger from Spider-Man Far From Home? And what exactly was going to happen with Spider-Man once Sony decided to take him out of the MCU after that cliffhanger? Well, Marvel Studios' Kevin Feige reveals nothing. They were going to ignore it and pretend like the character didn't even exist. So when it comes to the fallout of Marvel Studios with Sony and Disney being at the center of it in regards to Spider-Man, things got very bad really quick once everything publicly hit the internet. Now recently, Kevin Feige had revealed that originally there was only a few people that knew about this happening, and they were like the studio heads, that was it. The stars and everybody else did not know. The director didn't know. Nobody really knew. So he revealed that when the news hit the internet, this is what got the conversation started again. But what was the plan had things not hit the internet? Well, there was no plan. He revealed that he was just going to sit back because it's what he had to do. And essentially, they were just going to let a certain amount of time play out. And then Sony and Disney and Marvel Studios would announce a split that took Spider-Man from the MCU. And it would have been sometime after, this rollout of the, post-release of Spider-Man Far From Home, rounds, interviews, and all that. And that would have just been it. It's done. How would they have dealt with Spider-Man suddenly leaving the MCU? Well, they weren't going to, because they weren't legally allowed to. So the story would have just ended with the identity being outed, and now Sony has Tom Holland and nothing else. So, again, this paints an interesting picture, because if you look at what Andy Serkis said, Spider-Man was in Venom Let There Be Carnage up until the last minute, which means that agreement officially saved Spider-Man from appearing in that film so they could put Venom into the MCU, so things went a different way. So you see the Sony solution to letting Spider-Man leave the MCU and not renegotiate was just to toss Tom Holland into Venom 2 and let him exist in that film. Terrible. That is just awful. The Sony. I know people are going to get defensive and be like, of course you're defending this. You're a Marvel Studios Spider-Man fanboy. Bah. You really think it's a smarter idea to just drop Tom Holland's Spider-Man into Venom 2 with no explanation of who he is, where he's existed, that none of the other characters exist? He can't mention anything from the MCU, and the MCU just doesn't have a conclusion to its story. If that's a good idea of storytelling, that makes me a fanboy for wanting a reason for one and a conclusion to the other, then I guess so. Forgive me for wanting conclusions and coherent stories. But seriously, they weren't even allowed to say that he's gone. They weren't even going to be able to mention Spider-Man. Amazing. Could you imagine how they would have had to frame that story concluding? Whew.